In today's episode of the Villains Corner, we'll be going over the Lich King Arthas, one of Warcraft's most iconic and popular villains. The story with Arthas starts after the Second War. Arthas was just a kid after the Second War ended, and he wanted to be a hero like all of the people who fought in the war, and started getting special training by Mirrodin in order to learn how to fight. Some years later, Jaina paid a visit to Lordaeron, and Arthas offered to help escort her to Dalaran. And during the trip, they took a stop at an orc internment camp. Arthas remarked that he saw nothing but monsters and murderers as he looked at the orcs, and Jaina remarked that she felt bad for them, and they looked kind of sad. Despite their little difference in this one regard, Jaina and Arthas grew very close and became great friends. Arthas then starts his training to become a paladin, and eventually goes to Dalaran in order to, quote, study there, but was actually there just to flirt with Jaina. Eventually, the two start dating, but do so in secret. One day, Jaina drops a book, and then sneaks into a corner to kiss Arthas, when Kel'Thas catches them in the act when he was trying to return the dropped book. Kel'Thas was also interested in Jaina at this time, and called Arthas out on this, saying if he was going to date Jaina, he should do it openly and not in secret. Arthas remarked that they were both in important positions and didn't want people gossiping, and Kel'Thas scolded Arthas for being afraid of gossip as a reason for hiding their relationship, and then walked off. Arthas couldn't really disagree with this, so it did bother him a little bit. Only a little bit though. Him and Jaina kept dating for a few years and grew very close after this. Then one day, during a casual date, Jaina remarks that their future children would have blonde hair, which completely freaks Arthas out as he's not sure about the future, and then broke up with Jaina over this. Mainly because he thought he would make a bad husband and father or something, and broke things off because of his own insecurities. They both went their own ways and became important people. And then the plague started popping up. There was an epidemic of the plague that was killing people of the kingdom, and Arthas sent out to look for a cause. During his search, he ran into Jaina again, and found out the plague was being spread by the grain. They also found out that it was Kel'Thuzad who was the one spreading it, so they chased after Kel'Thuzad and killed him. But before Kel'Thuzad died, he told them that it was already too late to stop the plague. And Arthas at this point was very obsessed with trying to stop the plague, to the point where he was getting increasingly more and more hostile towards his allies as they tried to calm him down. But since they knew Arthas was only getting angry because he was worried about his people, they just kind of put up with it and helped him out anyway. Until they got to Stratholme. When Arthas arrived to Stratholme, he discovered the entire city had already been infected by the poison grain, and that there was nothing they could do to stop it, and it was only a matter of time before the entire population turned into undead. So Arthas came to the conclusion that he should kill all the citizens in the city before they turned into the undead, became violent, and an actual threat to everything else nearby. But when Arthas proposed his perfectly reasonable plan to his men, half of them were definitely not on board with this. Uther and Jaina were there as well. Uther was one of the very first paladins, and Arthas' teacher. And Uther basically told Arthas that he was not going to go kill civilians. So Arthas told Uther to get out of his sight. Jaina, upon seeing this, also left and didn't help him with Stratholme. So with all of the people who actually stayed behind, Arthas took them into the city and killed as many people as he could. Eventually, the population turned into undead halfway through, and he went on an undead killing spree. During this incident though, Arthas lost the ability to use the light, so he could no longer be considered a paladin. And in Stratholme, he ran into a dreadlord named Mal'Ganis, who taunted him and told him he was the one responsible, and that he'd be waiting in Northrend if Arthas was brave enough to go find him. So Arthas went to Northrend to hunt down Mal'Ganis, and at this point was absolutely obsessed with hunting him down. Turns out, killing a whole city of civilians didn't exactly leave Arthas in the best state of mind. While in Northrend looking for Mal'Ganis, Arthas runs into Mirrodin, the dwarf who trained him how to fight after the Second War. It's from Mirrodin that Arthas learns about Frostmourne, a cursed rune blade told to have magical powers. So Arthas offers to help Mirrodin look for it, because without his light powers, he's nowhere near as strong as he used to be as a paladin, and he'd need some kind of new source of power to help him stop Mal'Ganis. But during his Northrend campaign, other men from Arthas' home city of Lordaeron came to Northrend to tell Arthas that he'd been ordered to return home immediately. And they also tell Arthas' men that they've all been recalled as well. So all of Arthas' men started heading back to shore in order to take their boats home. So Arthas decides to not only ignore the order to return home, but to also destroy the ships before his men could make it to the shore so they couldn't return either, and be forced to stay and help. So he hires a couple of mercenaries and races to the shore and burn down all of their ships. And then when his men finally do make it to shore, Arthas blames the mercenaries and orders his men to kill them. Mirrodin was with Arthas this entire time and was increasingly not okay with what Arthas was doing. And Arthas killing the mercenaries was kind of the last straw for him. But at this point, Mal'Ganis shows up and starts sending his army after Arthas. Arthas knows he doesn't stand a chance against Mal'Ganis and his army, so he figures his best way to survive is to look for Frostmourne. Mirrodin reluctantly agrees to this, and they go out and look for it as quickly as possible. When Arthas and Mirrodin finally find Frostmourne, they find out the blade is cursed, which was Mirrodin's worst fear when he first heard about the sword. This was not going to deter Arthas at this point though, so he grabbed the blade, which caused some kind of magical explosion, which knocked out Mirrodin. Arthas assumed this explosion had killed Mirrodin, so he just left him to his fate, and with Frostmourne in hand, he came under the Lich King's control. Mal'Ganis then shows up and asks what the Lich King is telling him to do, since the Lich King and Mal'Ganis are on the same side. Arthas then kills Mal'Ganis, much to Mal'Ganis' surprise, because it turns out the Lich King isn't really the greatest friends with the Dreadlords. Arthas then finally returns home, only to kill his father and sack his own kingdom, turning them into his own personal undead army. Then Arthas goes out and raises his horse Invincible, and decides to resurrect Kel'Thuzad, as he was one of the Lich King's most trusted servants. So in order to do this, Arthas decides to go out and get his father's urn in order to carry Kel'Thuzad's body, only to discover the urn is being guarded by Uther. Arthas then attacks Uther in order to grab the urn, and kills him, but nearly loses the fight in the process. Turns out Uther was really powerful. After obtaining the urn, Arthas heads to Silvermoon in order to try to use the Sunwell to resurrect Kel'Thuzad, as Arthas needed a great source of power in order to bring Kel'Thuzad back as a Lich. So, with his massive army of undead, Arthas goes to Silvermoon and attempts to invade it. But Silvermoon has a very powerful magical protection, so attacking the city is not going well for Arthas. Luckily for him, one of the elves betrays Silvermoon and shows Arthas how to get past the magical defenses. With this, he easily gets past them, kills the ranger who was giving him the most problems, Sylvanas, and raises her as a banshee to be one of his personal guards. He then goes into the city, kills about 90% of the elves, including their king, and then uses the Sunwell in order to bring Kel'Thuzad back to life as a Lich. With Kel'Thuzad in the picture now, he tells them he now needs to go to Dalaran in order to steal the Book of Medivh, which was needed in order to bring the Burning Legion into the world. So Arthas kinda strolls into Dalaran, because he did just take out one of the hardest to sack cities on the planet. Going into Dalaran was only a slightly less difficult task. So Arthas goes into Dalaran, kills Antonidas, the leader of Dalaran, and gets the book. Kel'Thuzad then summons Archimonde into the world, who then immediately transfers control of the undead to the Dreadlords, destroys Dalaran, and then goes about trying to conquer the world. It's at this point that Kel'Thuzad tells Arthas about the secret plan of the Lich King. The Lich King wanted the Burning Legion to enter the world, so they wouldn't pay attention to him. And now the Legion was busy invading the planet, he could finally break free of their control. But if the Legion did succeed in taking control of the planet, they would just take him back. So he needed Arthas to go out and help Azeroth win the war against the Burning Legion. And part of his master plan was to give Illidan the Skull of Gul'dan. Illidan, with the Skull of Gul'dan, used it to kill the final Dreadlord that was keeping the Lich King in check. Eventually, the citizens of Azeroth won the war against the Legion, and Arthas went back to Lordaeron to meet up with Kel'Thuzad. In Lordaeron, Arthas and Kel'Thuzad chased off the remaining Dreadlords and went to rebuilding their Scourge army. But then Arthas started weakening, and the Lich King told him he needed to return to the Frozen Throne to recharge his powers. And it was at this moment that the Dreadlords attacked the city, and cut off Arthas from Kel'Thuzad. Arthas went into the forest to meet up with Kel'Thuzad again, and was ambushed by Sylvanas. Kel'Thuzad was able to come in and save Arthas at the last second, thanks to the fact that Sylvanas wanted to kill Arthas slowly, and only poisoned him first instead of killing him outright. So Kel'Thuzad chased off Sylvanas and her banshees and went to send Arthas off to Northrend. And it was at this point that Arthas told Kel'Thuzad that he was his only true friend, which was amazing for the Death Knight version of Arthas, who was pretty ruthless and killed everyone. This was the only time the Lich King version of Arthas called anyone a friend, or something close to an equal. When Arthas eventually made it to Northrend, he found that Illidan and his forces were there looking for him. Turns out, Illidan was working for Kil'jaeden, and Kil'jaeden was mad that the Lich King had broken free of his control, and had told Illidan to go kill him. So a weakened Arthas, arriving to Northrend, was met by a Blood Elf hunting party, and they were still pretty mad about what he'd done to Silvermoon. Luckily, Anub'arak showed up to save his hide. The new Lich King knew Arthas was weakened, and sent Anub'arak there to escort him to the Frozen Throne. Anub'arak told Arthas that Illidan's forces were everywhere, and they were on the lookout for him. So the only way they could make it to the Frozen Throne was by taking a secret underground Nerubian path. And while navigating the underground city, they kept hearing whispers about a traitor king. To which Arthas remarked, "I didn't know they knew who I was." To which Anubarak responded, "I believe they are referring to me," since the Lich King would routinely send Anubarak into Nerubian territory to kill them and raise them as part of their army, and the underground route they were taking wasn't completely under the Lich King's control. Then, after attacking some old god thing and making it out of the Nerubian cave, Arthas and Anubarak ran into Kael'thas and Illidan. At this point, Illidan was very close to the Frozen Throne, and Arthas and Anubarak were on their way to try to get to it first. But Kael'thas came in with a small blood elf force to try to stop them. Kael'thas and Arthas fought one-on-one, and Kael'thas went into melee combat with Arthas, with his blade Felamalorn. Arthas thought this was a terrible idea, as he knew Kael'thas was a powerful mage, and that he had destroyed this blade previously when his father used it to try to stop Frostmourne. So Arthas went in to try to cut Kael'thas in half, but to his surprise, the blade held up. And this is what Kael'thas was aiming for. Kael'thas was trying to buy time until Illidan could reach the Frozen Throne and kill the Lich King, which would rob Arthas of his power. And elven blades get stronger whenever they're reforged, so he knew Felamalorn would be able to stand up to at least a couple of hits from Frostmourne. So Kael'thas and Arthas had a battle, and Kael'thas was doing a great job of just buying time, even if he knew he couldn't actually kill Arthas, which really upset him, and he tried to throw Kael'thas off by taunting him and talking about Jaina. Arthas asked Kael'thas if he was still mad that he had stolen Jaina away from him, to which Kael'thas said, "You probably don't know this, Arthas, but Jaina loathes you now. You sicken and disgust her, and any love she once held for you has long since turned to hatred." And after hearing this, Arthas was the one who got riled up, and started attacking Kael'thas randomly in rage. At this point, Kael'thas thought that he had bought enough time by now, and teleported away. And with Kael'thas gone, Arthas recomposed himself, and headed straight to the Frozen Throne for Illidan. And Anubarak came in and stopped anyone else who might get in his way. So with Arthas and Illidan alone, they had a one-on-one battle. Illidan, very cocky that he was definitely gonna win since Arthas was visibly tired from his fight with Kael'thas, flew into the air and showed off his twin blades of Azzinoth, telling Arthas that he obtained the blades 10,000 years ago from a demon and had mastered them, and that his little rune blade that he had just acquired recently was no match for him. After hearing this, Arthas actually became very confident that he could win, since Frostmourne was basically fused with him and was an extension of himself, and there's no way Illidan's stolen blades, even with the years of experience, could come close to the mastery he had with Frostmourne. So when Illidan swooped down to go in for an attack, Arthas recklessly lunged up and struck with Frostmourne with the utmost confidence, and actually landed a blow. Then Illidan and Arthas went for another exchange, in which Arthas landed the final blow, which knocked out Illidan and left him bleeding out in the snow. And since Arthas was in a hurry, he just left Illidan there and ran to the Frozen Throne as soon as possible. Anubarak then came in and helped Arthas with like the 4 stones or whatever that were needed in order to access the Frozen Throne. Then Arthas finally climbed it, infused with Ner'zhul, and became the true Lich King. Arthas then contemplated his life and what it would mean to be the Lich King, and eventually decided he needed to make a few changes. So he cut out his heart in order to get rid of the human side of him and threw it beneath Icecrown. Then he killed Ner'zhul's spirit inside the armor. Kind of. It does sort of make a reappearance later on in WoW, but it doesn't affect the Lich King Arthas while he was still doing his thing. Arthas then rested up for a couple of years and then decided to come out and bring order to the world. Arthas thought that a unified world ruled by the undead could better handle outside threats, like the Legion and the Void, than the stupid people constantly fighting each other over dumb things. But more powerful people than him had tried and failed to take over the world, so he needed a different approach. First thing he did was raise Sindragosa. Then he instigated a scourge invasion in cities of the Horde and Alliance, in order to rile them up and provoke them to assault Northrend. Then he headed out to crush some of the Scarlet Crusade members in order to pull off a real assault on what he thought was a real threat. He sent a group of his Death Knights to Lighthope's chapel in order to draw out a certain person, since the place had too much holy magic for him to go near it. Then, after an altercation, Tyrion Fordring came out of hiding, cleansed the corrupted Ashbringer, and was able to fight off Arthas. Arthas then retreated back to Northrend to prepare his army and wait. A faction of the Death Knights rebelled against Arthas during this assault though, mad that Arthas sent them there to die, and decided to join the Alliance and the Horde. And with a letter from Tyrion, were able to talk to the respective factions' leaders without being killed, which then finally sparked the Northrend campaign. Eventually, Arthas notices something going down in the Borean Tundra, and heads down there to find one of his old Death Knights fighting one of his Sandlayan. He asks the Death Knight if he was there to rejoin the Scourge, but the Death Knight replies no, not after what Arthas had done to them at Light's Hope Chapel. It is then that the Sandlayan interjects and says he'll kill the traitors for him and bring their heads to Arthas later. Arthas basically said, okay, sure, whatever, and then later on had to revive that Sandlayan because he had ultimately failed. And he ended up being one of the bosses in his citadel later on. Arthas then went over to Zol'Durak because the trolls there were willing to join the Scourge, which would be a huge boost to the undead army. Later though, the leader of those trolls loses to an adventurer and asks the Lich King for help. Arthas comes down there and kills the troll instead, and thought it was amusing that the adventurer was able to beat his new champion. So he basically just said, you can go ahead and leave, I'm not gonna do anything. It was pretty hilarious how you killed my guy. He probably wasn't that strong anyway to lose to you. And then the adventurer just kind of leaves, as there's no way he could beat the Lich King on his own. And here's the real reason why Arthas kept letting adventurers go. His real plan was to raise powerful champions from the Alliance and Horde. That way he could send them back to their capitals and let them destroy themselves in a war of attrition, in which case Arthas could just come in later and raise everyone as his servants. Meanwhile, in Nax, with Kel'Thuzad, Arthas was talking to him about his preparations with his army, when Kel'Thuzad noticed he had some intruders. So Arthas told him to quickly get rid of them and then get back to work, and then Arthas never heard from Kel'Thuzad again. Eventually, the Horde and Alliance built a gigantic army in front of Icecrown Citadel, at the Wrathgate, after winning many battles against the Scourge and killing Kel'Thuzad. Arthas wanted them to arrive at his gates, weary from battle, not confident and strong. So he decided he needed to join the fight himself for a hot second to give them a much needed loss. And with both sides basically in full attendance, Arthas came out to meet them after sending a few of his minions to test them first. Arthas immediately kills Saurfang Jr., and then Putris ambushes everyone there with plague barrels that hurt both the living and the undead. Arthas, realizing how bad the plague actually is, retreats immediately, as even he can't deal with biological warfare, especially not from a plague specifically designed to kill him. Sometime later, an adventurer finds Arthas' heart that he threw below the citadel. The adventurer doesn't take the heart though, but Arthas was aware that it was found, so he sent some of his cultist followers down there to grab it. And then while the cultists were dealing with the heart, Arthas notices that some of the cultists weren't actually part of his gang. So he goes on down to check it out for himself, and finds out that some of the cultists are actually hidden Argent Crusade members, including Tyrion. Tyrion then attacks the heart with the Ashbringer and destroys it, which surprisingly weakened Arthas. Arthas then went to try to kill Tyrion, but at that point reinforcements came for him, and they were able to escape before Arthas could kill them all. Then, sometime later, Arthas found out that they were holding a tournament, so he dropped in to crash the party, and told everyone that the tournament was actually being held above a Nerubian stronghold, and broke the floor, sending all of the champions below to fight Anubarak. Arthas then retreated to let Anub deal with him, and then never heard from Anubarak again. The Horde and Alliance forces at this point had successfully pushed into Northrend from all angles, and the only thing left was to assault the citadel directly, which is exactly what Arthas wanted. The Argent Crusade made it to his front door and broke into the citadel, so in order to prepare for the incoming invasion, Arthas strolled on down to the Halls of Reflection in order to grab Frostmourne, only to find Sylvanas there trying to steal it. Or Jaina, depending on which faction tells this part of the story, and ends up chasing Sylvanas out, but isn't able to kill her as reinforcements come literally at the last second to save her. So Arthas just goes back to the top of his citadel and waits, gleaming in excitement at how well his plans are going. Or one would assume if he had emotions at this point. Once the bulk of the crusade finally makes it inside, including Tyrion Forgerin and the greatest champions in the world, Arthas taunts them by letting them know that Bolvar Fordragon, the Alliance leader at the Wrathgate, is actually still kind of alive and currently being tortured at the top of the citadel, giving them even more incentive to make it to the top of the tower, as if they didn't already need it. And Arthas made sure to give them a lot of tests and trials, as he wanted to make sure the champions who made it to him were as strong as humanly possible. So when they did finally make it to the top of the tower, beaten and weary from battle, Arthas immediately flash freezes Tyrion, and then decides to test the remaining champions for himself. After a long and hard fight, plaguing some of them, ripping the souls out of others, Arthas finally decides, yes, these guys are the best, and would make literally the best undead fighting force in the entire planet. So he then just instantly kills all of them, showing them that he was just playing around the entire time. Arthas had succeeded in his plan and won the final battle. So he then goes on to try to resurrect all the champions he just killed, when in one of the best uses of the Deus Ex Machina trope's history, Tyrion breaks out of his block of ice and shatters the Frostmourne while he's still in the middle of raising all the dead champions nearby, causing the sword to basically implode on itself, releasing all the trapped souls inside, which start attacking Arthas. Then one of the souls that escapes, Arthas' father, resurrects all of the dead fallen champions, who then finally finish off Arthas while he's being stunned by the spirits. Then, after Arthas is killed, Bolvar Fordragon takes up the mantle of Lich King in order to keep the undead army in check, who would have gone wild and destroyed the world after no longer being controlled by Arthas, and for some reason doesn't order all the undead to just jump into a volcano. And that's the end of Arthas' story. Definitely the most amount of lore out of all of the villains in game I've covered so far, and absolutely the most popular too. I'd like to thank Rachel for the drawing she did for this video, and if you like them, I'd urge you to follow her on Twitter, which will be linked in the video description below. And if you like this video, why not watch the playlist of all the other Villains Corners? There's only like 10 of them, and we'd really like to make more of them if this series gets enough views. I'll have that playlist linked at the end of this video right now.